All right, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our webinar, How the Stimulus Payments Impact Benefits and the Upcoming Deadlines to Spend Those Funds. We are from Disability Rights New Jersey, and we are thrilled to have you here with us today. Next slide, please. Thank you. So my name is Denise Lugo-Fowler, and I am the Director of Training and Outreach for Disability Rights New Jersey. I've been with the organization for about 25 years now, various roles, but currently responsible for our training and outreach program. I will be the facilitator and monitoring our chat window throughout the session. If you experience any technical issues, please open up the chat box, post a message, and hopefully I can resolve the issue. If not, we have Naomi Leibowitz also from our assistive technology program here as backup. So hopefully one of us can get that solved for you. Some quick housekeeping items. We'd love to hear from you. So please, throughout the presentation, feel free to post questions, comments in the chat box. And we would be happy to have this as an interactive session. So any questions, comments, post them in there, and one of us will either comment or write down the question for later. For privacy's sake, though, we request that you don't put any personal information in there, phone number, address, things like that. We want to, keep that out of the chat. If you're joining us on the phone, please know, we know that, chatting on the phone is just not really an option with Zoom. So if you have any questions, save them for the end, and please just unmute yourself. Wait a second, and then when there's a pause, please jump in and go ahead and say, you have a question, feel free to ask that question. We will do our best to answer the questions and hopefully provide you some information and guidance. And if we are not able to answer your questions, we will then follow up with you after our session today. Also, there are captions for our webinar today. If you need the captions to support you throughout the webinar, please look at the bottom of the screen. There is a captions button. It may say live transcript. It may say CC for captions, but it is along the bottom of your Zoom menu bar. And then finally, we are recording this session. And everyone who's registered for this, you will receive the link to the recording a few days from today. It will also be available on our YouTube page. And with that, I will turn this over to our presenters. I'm sorry, I will not. Next screen, please. Naomi, one more. Sorry, again, I'm from Disability Rights New Jersey, and so we were incorporated in 1994, and we are New Jersey's designated protection and advocacy agency for the state. We are a private nonprofit organization, and we provide legal and advocacy services to people with disabilities across the state with a mission to preserve their human, legal, and civil rights. And now with that, I will turn it over to our presenters to introduce themselves.
Good afternoon. My name is Mary Saccone. I'm the Director of Policy at Disability Rights New Jersey. I've been with Disability Rights New Jersey for about 23 years now, and I've been in many roles. And as I say, right now, I'm the Director of Policy. I also am the manager of the Protection and Advocacy for Voter Access program. And I'm also in charge of our new vaccine grant that we received to facilitate COVID vaccines.
Hi, everyone. I am Nicole Fowler. I am the manager of the Representative Payee program, also known as the Protection and Advocacy for Beneficiaries with Representative Payees. I have been with Disability Rights New Jersey for a little over 8 years now, and we've had this grant for a little over 3 years now. It was actually signed into law in 2018, and I've been working in that program ever since. This program reviews representative payees, whether individual payees or organizational payees throughout the state. And we're given these reviews by Social Security. They tell us exactly who to review, which entails an interview of the payee, meeting with the beneficiaries in their homes and reviewing their financial records to ensure they are using the funds appropriately within Social Security guidelines and meeting the needs of the beneficiaries. In addition to getting these reviews assigned by Social Security, we also have the ability to nominate representative payees for review, whether a beneficiary contacts us and reports some allegations of misuse of their funds, they're not able to get in touch with their payee, whatever the case might be. Again, we are also able to nominate these payees to Social Security for review. And Social Security might tell us, go ahead and review them yourselves. They might review them, but ultimately it is their decision. And we'll talk about representative payees specific to the economic impact payments later in the presentation. So I'll turn it back over to you, Mary.
Okay. So we will cut what we plan on covering today is we're going to be discussing what are the economic impact payments, how do these payments affect Social Security beneficiaries, and what issues have arisen between beneficiaries and representative payees regarding these economic impact payments. Next slide. So what are the economic impact payments? Well, last year when COVID first hit and suddenly everything was on lockdown and all businesses were closed, there was a big concern that a lot of people were going to not have enough money to pay for things like rent and food and that type of thing. So Congress acted and passed the CARES Act. And I believe they passed it either in the end of March of last year or early April, somewhere around there. I can't quite remember exactly the date. There were many pieces to that act, but one of the biggest pieces was this economic impact payment that they would provide a check up to $1,200 for each individual person, or $2,400 if you were a joint tax filer, and $500 for each qualifying child, depending on your 2019 income. So basically you would get, so each person, each taxpayer would get $1,200. In December, because the pandemic wound up going on much longer than anybody anticipated, and there were still issues in terms of people getting back to work, Congress again passed another stimulus bill. This was called the Consolidated Appropriations Act. And again, they provided these economic impact payments of up to $600, which would be $1,200 if you were a joint income tax filer, and $600 for each qualifying child, depending on your 2019 income. Once again, the pandemic has continued on into the beginning of the year. And recently, in the American Rescue Plan, Congress has again enacted another economic impact payment for people under the American Rescue Plan. In this one, each qualified individual could receive up to $1,400, which would be $2,800 for joint tax filers, and up to $1,400 for each qualifying dependent. Once again, based on your 2020 income or your 2019 income if you haven't filed your 2020 return yet. Next slide, please. So who is eligible to receive these payments? Unfortunately, each payment was a little bit different in terms of eligibility. So the first two are basically the same eligibility. The third one is different. So even if you were eligible for the first two, you might not be eligible for the third. So it depends on specifically what your income was. For the first two payments, you had to have an income. If you had an income lower than $75,000 per individual, or $150,000 if married, or if you filed as a head of household, that was $112,500. However, if you made more than that, it would reduce the amount that you could receive. So you wouldn't receive the full $1,200 if you had a higher income than $75,000. It depended on what your actual income was that you had reported in the prior tax year. So, but it was completely phased out if you had an income over $99,000 per individual, $198,000 if married, filing jointly, or $150,000 if head of household. For the third payment, they continued to maintain the eligibility of $75,000 per individual and $150,000 if married, or $112,500 if single and head of household. However, they put more restrictions on the amounts, on the eligibility if you were above those amounts. So it phased out much quicker. So it's completely phased out if you earn $80,000 per individual, $160,000 if you marry jointly, and you were also $120,000 if it's head of household. So that's why you may have, if a person may have received the first two payments and then suddenly didn't receive the third one, because they might have been in that phase out period where they would have phased out, wouldn't have completely phased out in the first two, but were phased out completely in the third. So that's something to keep in mind. Next slide, please. So for the qualifying dependents, this also changed per each payment. And that's why you need to know kind of a little bit of difference. For the first economic economic impact payment, it was $500 for each child under 17. The second economic impact payment was $600 for each child under 17. However, in the third payment, the one most recent under the American Rescue Plan, it's $1,400 for each dependent of any age. So it could be an adult dependent. So if you have a child with a disability who's a dependent of yours, or you're taking care of your elderly parent and you put them down as a dependent under your tax return, you actually could be eligible for an economic impact payment under the American Rescue Plan. To receive the money for the qualifying dependents, though, you must file a tax return for the dependents. Under the first one, there was a form that you could fill out and you could get the money for the dependents. However, they're not doing that anymore. So you actually need to file a tax return. If you didn't get the full amount you were entitled to because you didn't fill out that form and they didn't have a record of having a dependent, you can obtain a 2020 recovery rebate credit. You just have to file a 2020 tax return. And federal tax returns are not due until May 15th. So you still have a couple weeks here if you want to get that money, if you want to be able to claim that rebate credit so you can obtain the money, you still have a couple weeks to file that within the time frame. Next slide, please. Now, the first two payments have been sent out a long time ago. When are you going to receive the third one, since that just passed in the American Rescue Plan in March? These payments, as with the prior ones, if you received a prior one, and you will probably receive it in the same format. It will be automatic. You don't have to file anything to get it unless you have to file the tax return to get the dependent. And most beneficiaries will not need, so they won't need to take any extra further action. You will receive it in either direct deposit or through the mail as a paper check or an economic impact payment card. My understanding is it will be in the same format that you received the other payments. And most of the distributions began rolling out right after the American Rescue Plan was passed. And so that was like March 12th, and they continued on through April. So most people, I believe, have already received their money, but if you haven't, you should be getting it shortly. Next slide. All right, at this point, I'm going to pass it back over to Nicole. If you have any other questions about the actual economic impact payments, please put your questions in and we'll answer them at the end. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Mary. So first, let's talk about how will the economic impact payments impact my Social Security benefits. So each payment is considered unearned income and will not impact any federally needs-based programs such as SSI or Medicaid when they're initially received. They are exempt from counting as a resource, whether it be $2,000 for the individual or $3,000 for the couple for 12 months following the receipt of your EIP. However, it's important that we talk about this now because we are nearing the 1-year anniversary of the first payment. So these first payment funds should be spent as soon as possible so that it does not jeopardize your eligibility for these federally needs-based programs. Next slide. So how can I ensure I will not be over-resourced for benefit eligibility because of these stimulus payments? So there are a few things we need to do. First being, identify the dates you received each separate payment. Excuse my dog. My apologies. And secondly, identify 12 months from the date that you received each separate payment. So for example, if you received your first $1,200 stimulus check on June 1st of 2020, identify 12 dates or 12 months from that date. Secondly, if you you received your second payment December 1st of 2020, identify 12 months from that date. Next slide, please. So now that we've identified the dates that you received it, identified 12 months from the date that you need to spend it down by, make sure you use those funds by each identified date. And that might look like a variety of things. You might want to spend it down on something you might need, whether it be clothing, something you might want, whether it be a gaming console or a TV, or you also have the option to save it in ways that will not jeopardize your eligibility. For example, establishing an ABLE account. And I won't go too much into that, but that also is an option. So you don't necessarily need to spend down those funds, but you can also explore ways that you can save them that won't jeopardize your SSI or Medicaid benefits. And now we'll talk about a little bit about Rep Payees. So if you do have a representative payee, talk to them about your stimulus payments, because fact of the matter is the representative payee will most likely have received your stimulus checks, because these stimulus checks are deposited into the same account that your Social Security benefits are typically received, which, if you have a representative payee, is managed by someone other than yourself. So they can tell you the exact date each payment was received. And at your request, and your request only, they can help you develop a plan to use those funds. Next slide. So how should a representative payee use a beneficiary's economic impact payment? And the most important takeaway is that the EIP belongs to the beneficiary and the beneficiary only. It is not a Social Security benefit, and therefore your payee does not have the authority to manage these funds. It belongs to the beneficiary and the beneficiary only. However, the payee, because they are receiving it in the account that your benefits are also received, they should discuss the economic impact payment with the beneficiary. And that gives us some options. If you, as the beneficiary, want to use the stimulus check independently, the representative payee absolutely must turn over the funds to the beneficiary. It is your right to use these funds as you wish and use these funds independently. But you also have the option to ask your payee for help using or saving the economic impact payment, and the payee might do so outside of their role as Rep Paye. Again, it is wholly your decision. If you want to use these funds independently, it is a requirement that the payee must turn over these funds. So as we go to the next slide, we'll talk about what happens if that does not happen. So what issues might arise when a representative payee receives your economic impact payment? And this may be something that you had experienced or may not have experienced, but let's talk through some possible scenarios. What if my payee will not discuss my EIP and I don't know if I received one? What if my payee refuses to turn over my EIP? What if my payee uses my EIP to pay themselves back for a past debt or towards my care cost? And lastly, what if my payee spends the money without talking to me or spends it on something I do not want? And a simple example of this might be that you're living in a group home and the payee decides to purchase a recliner for the living room of the group home for everyone to use. And the payee did not talk to you about this. You did not agree to this. You don't express that this was your wish. So what do we do if that happens? And this is not an exhaustive list of issues you might come across, but these are just some possible scenarios. Next slide. So the simple answer to these 4 questions that we just posed is the payee is absolutely not allowed to do any of that. They cannot take your funds towards care costs. They can't say, you owe us a debt, I'm seizing these funds. They can't say, even though you're telling me you want to use these funds independently to spend it on whatever you wish, I'm going to help you manage them. None of those things are allowed as a payee, because again, these are not Social Security benefits. These are benefits issued by the Department of Treasury. So if you suspect your EIP funds were misused, what options do you have? So First, let's make it clear that because they're not Social Security benefits, Social Security does not have the authority to investigate if the pay misused your stimulus funds. However, if you reach out to SSA and advise that you believe your stimulus funds specifically have been misused by your payee, they can take that allegation and decide to investigate the payee for possible misuse of your Social Security benefits. Not your stimulus benefits, but they can investigate possible misuse of your Social Security benefits. And Social Security at that point might determine that the pay is no longer suitable to serve as a pay and may appoint a new payee to serve. But the bottom line is, if you suspect your EIP funds were misused, contact Disability Rights New Jersey. We will investigate each complaint that we receive, and depending on the findings, we will take appropriate action. Again, you can still report these concerns to Social Security, but they cannot necessarily investigate the misuse of your stimulus funds. They can investigate your payee for possible misuse of Social Security benefits, but you can also, again, report this to Disability Rights New Jersey. And as I mentioned during the introduction, we also have the ability to nominate representative payees for review. So while Social Security assigns us representative payees to review, we can also nominate. So if you have any concerns with your representative payee, you can contact Disability Rights New Jersey and we can nominate for review, which again, we would go out to review the payee, we would meet with you as the beneficiary, and we would review the financial records. Next slide, I think we're going on to questions. Yeah, so I saw some questions popping up in the chat box that we might want to address.
Okay, great. So I will start with the first one. So if an individual has received the first two via direct deposit, but has not received the third one, and the IRS is telling them that the information does not match, they do not have a payee. So what should they do? Is there any advice there?
When you say they don't match, is it because the direct deposit doesn't match the person? I'm a little confused what they mean by do not match.
So it says the IRS first said no information for many weeks, and lately says information does not match the information on the IRS that the IRS has on file.
Okay, they can do a couple things. One, they can probably file a tax return for 2020, and that way they get the information. As I say, it's surprising that they gave the first two, and now suddenly they're saying they don't have the information, doesn't match. So, I mean, obviously you can call the IRS, but it sounds like that's what's been done. But it may be something where it may just be filing your 2020 return, and that way it clears it up.
Okay, and if this individual, if you have any other, a follow-up question, please feel free to put that in the chat, or we can discuss it, separately. Next question: can these funds be used to pay room and board?
So they can be, if that is your decision. I'm just looking at this from a representative payee lens. The payee cannot seize this for room and board, saying that you have a past debt that they need to pay back to themselves. But if you've received this payment and you want to use it towards room and board on your own, that is absolutely your decision.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, so these individuals, they didn't receive the first two because the dependent is over 17, but they received the third payment, but it was deposited into the parent's account and not in the representative payee account. The young adult does file his own returns. Do we have to spend down from the date of the deposit?
So that's the tricky thing, is there hasn't been very clear guidance on what this 12-month mark looks like. If I receive the benefit on June 1st of 2020, do I have until June 1st of 2021, or do I have until July 1st of 2021? That guidance has not been made clear, unfortunately. Let me just pull up the question so I could see it for myself. do we have to spend down from the date of deposit? And again, it's also not clear if you're receiving a paper check, is that 12-month period from when the check was issued, or was it from the date that it was deposited into your account? To my knowledge, that has not been made clear as well. So unfortunately, I don't think we have a concrete answer for that. But Mary, do you have any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at this and it's a little confusing because it sounds like that we didn't receive the first two because the dependent was over 17, received the third payment was deposited into my husband and my account and not into the Rep Paye account. Because it's an adult dependent, I guess, is what my understanding is. So the key is if the money belongs to that person, but if that's going to affect that dependent's benefits, then it's going to have to be spent down, regardless of whether it's in your account or the adult child's account. So that's the key. I mean, if it's going to impact. So I don't know if you're listing him as that adult child as a dependent on your tax returns, and this is getting into really technical stuff, so I don't want to give really any advice because I'm not real sure. But my understanding is if it's going to impact on his benefits, then you're going to want to spend it down, whether it's in your account or in the adult dependent. But I would suggest that you speak with a person more like a disability law, someone who has a lot of information about benefits specifically, because this is a really technical issue.
Okay, next question is, can a beneficiary use the EIP for anything he or she wants? For example, going on vacation, purchasing a TV, etc.
Absolutely. Again, it's the beneficiary's funds. It's not your payee's funds to use as they wish. If you express to, and again, this is if you have a representative payee. But regardless if you have a representative payee or not, you are able to spend these funds exactly how you wish. And the payee is required to turn it over to you so you can spend it on that vacation or on that TV or whatever that might be.
Okay. Next question, can the EIP be used to purchase an item that is shared by group home residents?
So that's an example that I kind of touched on a bit. If you personally would like to use those funds to do so, absolutely you can. Again, if it's the payee who is making this purchase without your input and you expressing that you want to make this purchase for the group home, then no, they cannot do that. But if you want to purchase a shared TV or a shared recliner or whatever that might look like, you can absolutely do so, but the payee cannot require you to do so.
Okay, and the follow-up question is, do we have a telephone number for IRS that someone can call if they have a question about their payment?
I just looked it up. The number is 1-800-919-9835. That's the number specifically for economic impact payment questions. 1-800-919-9835. Should I type that in the chat for everybody?
Getting in right now.
Okay.
Okay. So that's on there now. Do we have any other questions? Anyone on the phone question? Okay, great. So as I mentioned earlier, we will have this recording put up on our YouTube channel, and a link will be sent to everyone who's registered. We'll also be sending out a copy of the PowerPoint to everyone. And if there are any other questions, please feel free to give us a call. Naomi, I'm sorry, can you go to the next slide? We have our contact information here. Feel free to contact us at our 800 number or our email advocate@drnj.org. And last slide, please. And here's our social media pages and our website. We actually have another couple questions came in. Let's see. Can a payee purchase items for an individual who lives in a group home that the individual wants and needs, like a recliner just for him, a laptop TV tray, not shared with group home residents? Payee discussed all purchases with the individual and the individual agrees. And can EIP be used on a personal trainer?
So yes, let me start off with the EIP can be used on a personal trainer because it can be used on anything that the individual wants or needs. And the payee can use these funds if the individual expresses the wants and needs for the recliner, for the laptop, TV tray, that belongs just to that individual. Absolutely. But you then deal with the concern of, well, is it going to be placed in the living room or is it going to be placed in this individual's room? But if the individual expresses the want and agrees to this purchase, absolutely it can be used for individual purchases in a group home.
Okay. And do we have to file this money? No. Might need a little more information on that. Like file a tax return? Is that? So we'll follow up with that. What happens if the check is not used within 1 year?
So if the check is not used within that 12-month period, you jeopardize losing your benefits. They will determine Social Security, Medicaid, they will determine you are over-resourced for that month or for multiple months, however long you are over that resource limit of 2,000 or 3,000, and you can absolutely jeopardize losing your benefits at that point, which is why it's important to identify those dates and identify a plan to use those funds by that date.
Yes, filing a tax return. So if we receive this money, do we have to file a tax return? Question. Or does this have to be included on our tax return?
When you're talking about tax returns, I'm not a tax specialist. Basically, if you were, there's a certain income level that you would need to file a tax return. As we said, in order to get the money if you didn't get a dependent funds from one of the economic payments impact payments that you would have been entitled to, you have to file a tax return to get that rebate for that money. You would need to file a tax return if you were above a certain income level. But if you got your money, you got what you were entitled to, and you're not above an income level, then you may not have to file. But that's each individual circumstances. So if you definitely have to file if you have a dependent that you should have gotten an economic impact payment for and you did not receive it. So you need to file it in order to get the rebate on that money. And so that's the one time I know you would be required to file.
And we have a follow-up question about who would be the benefits specialist to contact with the questions about the EIP payment deposited in the parent's account.
As I say, you can speak with an elder law attorney that deals with elder and disability law attorney that deals with specifically benefits. They can talk more in terms of making sure that the person is not going to mess up their benefits because money went into their account. You might be able to call the IRS, that economic impact payment phone number, to see if they can answer your questions about if that would mess up. You could probably call Social Security as well. So those would be 3 places that I would suggest you call for those particular types of questions. As I say, it's a very unusual circumstance because of the fact that it's an adult dependent that the money got placed in the parent's account versus the adult dependent's account.
Okay, and one other one came in. So the money arrived at her checking account. Can you go over the 2,000 for that month or future months?
So yes, if, for example, using that June 1st example again, if the $1,200, the first economic impact payment arrived in your checking account that month, you could have your $2,000 resource limit plus that $1,200 for 12 months after that initial stimulus payment was received. Once you do spend down those exact stimulus funds, though, you will be held again to that $2,000 resource. But if you do not spend that $1,200 initially, you do have, again, 12 months to spend that down. So until that 12-month period, you can have 2,000 plus 1,200 plus, if you received the next payment of $600 within that 12-month period from the first one, you can have 2,000 plus 1,200 plus that 600. So you can always be that amount over resource within that 12-month period of each stimulus payment.
Okay, great. Has the income limit raised from 2,000?
No.
No,
No.
the eligibility for the federal need benefits of SSI and Medicaid is still 2,000, but because it was specifically determined that these economic impact payments do not count towards your resource limit for 12 months, you still have that resource limit of 2,000 plus that exception.
Basically, Social Security just doesn't even look at that money until you've had it for 12 months. Then once it's been 12 months and then they look, and if you still have that money left over, they're going to add it to your resource limit or your $2,000.
Yes.
Okay, great. So I don't see any other questions. So on that note, I will say thank you for joining us today. And if anyone has any other questions about the economic impact payments or any other areas, feel free to give us a call, email us, check out our website. We will be happy to assist you. And on that note, I will say goodbye and hope everyone has a great day. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.